So as some of you may know that we started this Bring Health and You series as of last fall, and we have, this is a monthly Zoom presentation or discussion. It's like a fireside chat. It's not a formal discussion, so it's not boring, and people can jump in, ask questions. And I have been the hostess in the last year, so I'm very excited again to present you two of a great panelists today. And we will be talking about women and brain health. So I am Dr. Kate Zhong. I'm a geriatric psychiatrist. I'm the Director of Innovation at the Department of Brain Health, School of Integrated Health and UNLV. And today, joining me, we have Dr. Jessica Caldwell, who is a neuropsychologist at the Cleveland Clinic Louisville Center for Brain Health. Jessica and I used to work together for quite a while when I was back still in Cleveland Clinic. Jessica is the director of the Alzheimer's movement prevention center at the Louisville Center. So she has been working diligently with many thought leaders in the country, including Maria Shriver, to lead the incredible effort of women Alzheimer's movement. So we are very fortunate to have Jessica here joining us, and her National Institute of Aging research is really focusing on understanding the effect of estrogen and stress associated with Alzheimer's risk, particularly among women. So that's very exciting. And the other panelist we have today is Amanda Osse, soon to be Dr. Osse, who is a neuroscience researcher at UNLV. Amanda has been working in the research laboratory for quite a while, working together with our team and the Brain Health Department. And joining us today is actually also our chairman, Dr. Jeff Kinney, in the audience as well. So I am very excited today to discuss multiple issues on women and brain health. So welcome everyone. So women and brain health, why do we want to talk about it? Women, we are truly at the epicenter of Alzheimer's. About 2/3 of Alzheimer's patients are women, and 70% of dementia caregivers are women. And we also know that after age 60, women have more than twice the risk of developing Alzheimer's compared to developing breast cancer. So that's really astonishing. And in addition to having higher risk for Alzheimer's, women are also at a higher risk for stroke, for depression, for anxiety disorder. Let me just move that, okay? Good, okay, good, thank you, Andy. So among a whole host of brain health issues. And next, please, next slide. Can you? So why does Alzheimer's affect more women than men? Obviously, that's multifactorial. Could be age, could be hormones, could be stress, could be so many factors. So that's what we'll be talking about today. Next slides, please. So let's start by discussing a little bit the differences and similarity between male and female brain. Okay, so let's start the slideshow. I'm going to turn this to Jessica to start with. And just can you share with us a little bit with regard to the differences between male and female brain in terms of their structures, their functions, their chemistry, so on and so forth. How different are we from our male counterpart?
Sure, thanks for having me. What I would say is that when we think about the brain, really for men and women, we're more alike than we are different. But the ways in which we're different are quite relevant for our memory as well as for Alzheimer's disease and dementia risk. So some of the things that I've looked at in my research, as well as others have, are the ways that the brain is different in terms of thickness or size of particular regions. So for example, women have thicker cortex, or the outer part of the brain, in a few regions in our temporal lobe, as well as in our parietal lobes. And those regions are important for Alzheimer's disease, and may have implications for the way that our symptoms show up in Alzheimer's disease. Similarly, the way that our brains work is a little bit different. So women have different types or patterns of brain activity when we're at rest, as well as when we're trying to learn and remember new things. And although we might not notice day-to-day differences between us and male friends or our spouses, we may actually have different risk patterns for Alzheimer's disease in relation to those types of small brain differences.
So that's fascinating. So obviously there are differences in terms of our structure, and you also have just alluded to in terms of volume of our brains between male and female. How does that play into the risk factors for dementia and for Alzheimer's?
Well, one of the things that I'm interested in is about resilience. And so I think that one of the ways these small brain differences between men and women may show up in Alzheimer's disease risk and resilience is that women may have a little bit more to draw from when it comes to the thickness of certain brain regions, or the way that certain types of brain activity might be able to compensate for early changes. And what that means is that while men might appear to have a more steady decline with Alzheimer's disease related changes, women may appear to have a little bit more of a resilient plateau, followed by a little bit of a cliff afterward when we use up that resilience.
So that's very helpful for us to understand. I think that there have also been a lot of studies showing that, obviously women tend to speak more than men by and large. And also that in terms of our overall verbal fluency, women tend to do better than men. So that may also play a part in terms of the early detection, isn't it?
Sure. And what I think of especially is women have on average better verbal memory than men do. But unfortunately, when a woman and a man come into the clinic concerned about their memory, we typically use the same test and the same cutoff score in order to diagnose Alzheimer's disease or dementia. I'm simplifying a little bit, but it is true that women are very likely diagnosed later or underdiagnosed when it comes to early symptoms, because we have this advantage early on.
So sometimes it's almost like a double-edged sword, isn't it? We do better, but also that tends to be a little bit delayed in terms of being detected through the clinical evaluation. I'm going to turn this to Amanda, if you can share with us from a more basic level, the molecular level, the pathway level, how does the male brain differ from a female brain?
Yeah, so at a cellular and mechanistic level, there are a lot of differences between male and female brains. So the research shows that cells do have a sex. So there is male cells and there are female cells, and that's based on some of the genetics components of the cells. So just to begin with, chromosomal levels, XX is female and XY is male. So we do have different genes that are being expressed just at a basic level. And for example, so a lot of my research focuses on inflammation. And so between male and females, there's about 500 genes that are different just in inflammatory response. So there's a lot of other areas that there's also this genetic difference happening. And obviously the difference in genetics and in the cells result in different pathways, so downstream effects. So our brain reacts to things like chemicals or hormones differently as well.
That's great. So how would that play in terms of women developing Alzheimer's? So you're talking about the immune response, you talk about inflammatory processes. Can you share with us the current understanding from the basic research perspective? How does that play?
Yeah, so in Alzheimer's disease, there's a couple different pathologies that are commonly heard of the amyloid beta plaques and the neurofibrillary tangles or tau tangles. But another component of the disease is neuroinflammation. And this is actually seen in a number of neurodegenerative diseases, not just Alzheimer's disease. But for example, if you cut yourself, you're going to have an inflammatory response. It's going to get puffy and red, a little bit of pain, and that's your body's way of dealing with that. And the same thing actually happens in the brain. We just can't see it and can't feel it. So there is an inflammatory response happening when the brain is under attack as well. And so what's interesting is that in Alzheimer's disease, there's a chronic neuroinflammation happening. So typically every day you're going to have a little bit of neuroinflammation happening in your brain, but then it turns off when it's no longer needed. In Alzheimer's disease, this is chronically happening. So the inflammatory response doesn't shut off. So we have this problem with chronic neuroinflammation. But interestingly enough, there is actually a difference between male and female in this inflammatory response. As I mentioned, the differences in just genetically. And so females actually are more prone to an inflammatory response. So they have a pro-inflammatory response in their brains stronger than males. So this might be one of the reasons why women are at more risk for developing Alzheimer's disease or having worsening of Alzheimer's disease.
And I will be addressing that in the later part of our discussion as to what we can do about it, right? So now just I want people to keep that in mind. So the propensity of women to have more inflammatory process, and then we need to keep that in mind so that there are a lot of things we can do on our day-to-day life in which that we can really make a conscientious effort to reduce the overall potential inflammatory process and therefore to reduce the risk for dementia and Alzheimer's. So I think that's where the basic science and the clinical recommendation are linked, right? So that's very helpful. So and again, I just want to remind people that we do open the chat box. If you have any questions for us, please feel free to just type in any questions you may have. Now we have touched upon the brain in terms of the size, the structures, as well as some of the immune and inflammatory response process between male and female. I want to turn this to Jessica. Now, let's really talk a little bit about hormones. And I think that when people think about why women have a higher risk, they think about age. Obviously, we live longer compared to our male counterpart because Alzheimer's, the age is one of the most a major risk factor. And secondly, obviously, is the sex and why. So I think there have been a lot of study looking into that. So Jessica, I would love you to share with our audience, how does that work, the hormones throughout the entire life process?
That's a great question. So I'm sure that soon-to-be Dr. Osse will add on to what I have to say. But in terms of hormones, we know that women have a sharp loss of estrogen around the time of menopause, which the average age is around 51 to 53. And really at that time, estrogen goes from, a typical fluctuation of low to high to really stable low levels over the course of a few years. And this is in pretty big contrast to what happens for men, which is called andropause. And that happens quite a bit later, where men kind of steadily lose testosterone, but not to that same sort of level that women lose estrogen in terms of the steepness of the loss. Unfortunately for women, we know that estrogen actually supports our memory. So the brain regions that are important for forming new memories, getting new memories into long-term storage, they actually have a whole lot of estrogen receptors. And so while most of us women, we really think about menopause, losing estrogen as the time when our fertility stops, it isn't just about fertility. Estrogen is a multitasker that has roles throughout our body and throughout our brain. And so one of the reasons why we might be at greater risk for Alzheimer's than men is that we lose this estrogen around the time of menopause. And our brains have to really readjust to living in a different space with different types of fuel and a different type of support network for our cells.
So what can we do about it? Obviously, we cannot change the nature of our biology.
So in terms of what to do about losing estrogen, this is a very hot topic in research. And my message for all of you is that the answer that I give today may not be the same answer I give in 6 months or a year even. This is how much research attention is being devoted to this. But what a lot of people ask about is, well, should I put estrogen back into my body? Should I use menopausal hormone therapy or hormone replacement therapy, as it's called? And the answer is, we're not sure yet. And it's got to be a very personal decision and discussion between a woman and her OBGYN doctor to see if it's right for you. And here's the short story of why that's true. We know that if women go through menopause too young, and by too young, I mean earlier than 40 or 45, that's not great for our brains and our bodies. And so it might actually be good to put in hormone replacement. On the other hand, if a woman is long past that average age of menopause, around 53, it's not great to put hormone therapy or estrogen back into your body, because your body and your brain have already adjusted to the world without estrogen. And putting estrogen in could actually be harmful to you. On the other hand, right around that average time of menopause, that age 53 or so, we're not sure. So for some women, it may be true, especially if you're at risk for Alzheimer's, that putting estrogen back in for some amount of time might help your brain health in the long run. At the same time, the studies do show conflicting findings. So I think that the bottom line really is that a whole basket of risks will really have to be considered. Everything from a woman's genetic makeup to maybe even your weight, your family history of things like cancer or heart disease. Because estrogen has whole body and brain effects, we need to be very careful about who we change it for. So again, at this point, we kind of know if someone is young or older, but in the middle, you've got to make a very personal decision alongside your doctor.
Thank you, Jessica. I think that that's very helpful. This has always been a very heated, debated area. I think, as you pointed out, there are many factors to be considered. Sounds like also the timing of starting the hormonal replacement therapy is very critical. I think that there are studies showing that if the women start to use this right around the menopause, that tend to be much more effective or beneficial compared to either too early or too late.
Yes. So in terms of the symptoms of menopause, other things like sleep disruption or hot flashes, absolutely. The guideline should be to take the hormone replacement around the time of the symptoms. And again, if you are going to do hormone replacement, thinking about your brain health, probably that window of opportunity is the time again, but it's not a one size fits all sort of answer.
Jessica, in your experience, how many of our gynecologists who are really versed on this subject? Because I think that it's not easy for us to really approach, our gynecologist on this subject. So what kind of advice would you give to our audience?
I would say that, not all gynecologists are going to be well-versed on this topic. And in many ways, that makes sense. So like I mentioned, this literature, when it comes to the research, it is rapidly changing. And so it may be true that something came out just weeks before you see your gynecologist that might swing their opinion one way or another. At the same time, it is important to open up this discussion. And I would suggest first, before you have a meeting with your gynecologist, really just knowing in advance what you'd like to talk about. And if it helps you, write down a couple of points so that it's easier to remember when you're in the room, because sometimes those appointments can be faster than we'd like. The things to tell your gynecologist are, you know, I'm concerned about whether or not I should take hormone replacement. And I'm concerned because I have a family history of Alzheimer's disease, and I've heard that I need to think about this. What does it look like in terms of my medical risks for taking that kind of therapy or not taking it? And really just opening that discussion can be so helpful. If you have a doctor who you feel like you're not quite being heard, it is totally valid to also get a second opinion on that. I would say, although these are difficult decisions, the most important thing is really having a doctor who's listening, who's openly discussing things with you.
Good. I think making the informed decision is really critical. Ultimately, it's your brain, it's your body, right? Just really put a lot of effort into that. So you talked about some other risk factors, you know, the family history, genes, and age. And I'm going to turn this to Amanda just for a second to talk a little bit about genes. And I'm not talking about what we wear as a gene.
Yeah, so there's a really common genetic risk factor right now, ApoE. And many may have heard of this. This is the same gene that they look at if you're doing like 23andMe. But they look to see what your status is on ApoE. And there's a couple different versions of this gene. There's ApoE2, ApoE3, and ApoE4. And so ApoE2 actually decreases your risk for developing Alzheimer's disease. ApoE3 is kind of neutral, and ApoE4 actually increases your risk for developing Alzheimer's disease 12 times the normal ApoE3 carrier. So what's interesting is that there is, again, I'm going to highlight the same thing that Jessica is highlighting, is that the research is very mixed. So there is some indication that ApoE4 females may be at more risk as well, more than just the 12 times the normal rate, but this is also very, very mixed data and more research is needed. But that just also shows how some of these genetic differences could be also playing a role in the risk for females.
So what will be the recommendation for people? Should they go and find out if they have ApoE4 genes?
That is definitely a personal preference of whether they want to know if they're more at risk. There may be some options for lifestyle changes if they are more at risk. So that might be something that they want to find out. But yeah, that's definitely a personal preference. And you can definitely find out if you go to a physician and ask, you can have genetic testing done to see your ApoE status. And 23andMe, you can as well. I think they only show whether you're going to be ApoE4 or not. So just increased risk versus not. And I don't know the reliability of that test, but talk to your doctor if you're interested in getting this genetic testing done.
I think another way of finding out is by participating in clinical trials. There are many, many clinical trials in which that they will be performing genetic testing, including ApoE genes and some other risk genes as well. So good. So any other comments from the genes perspective? Amanda, I wonder, any studies showing the difference between African-American versus Caucasian or Hispanic versus Caucasian on this particular subject?
So a lot of my research isn't in that area, so I'm not going to talk too much about that, but there is indications that they're more at risk, and maybe Jessica can talk about this more on the clinical side of things. But there does seem to be more risk in minority populations that are female as well.
Absolutely. I'll just add to that it's true that people who are Black or African American have about double the rates of Alzheimer's disease as people who are white, non-Hispanic. And Hispanic individuals compared to non-Hispanic white people have about 1.5 times the risk. At the same time, it's true that right now with the research we have, it looks like risk factors are different. So for example, there is evidence in the research literature showing that things like having a copy of that ApoE4 allele might be a really relevant risk factor for people who are not Hispanic and white, but not as much a risk factor that's relevant if someone's Black or African American, Hispanic, or also Native American. And why might that be? Well, one of the reason is when we talk about the other types of risks for Alzheimer's disease, which are modifiable and not genetic. So I'm talking about things in our environment and things that unfortunately have been skewed where white people have a benefit and people who have been historically marginalized do not have a benefit. One example of that is access to high quality fresh food. Another example of that is access to education and a life kind of access profile that allows for exercise and physical activity. So all of those things are modifiable risks for Alzheimer's disease, and those types of risks may be more relevant in people who are not white. So in all of those groups I mentioned.
So obviously it's a very complex issue. And you have talked about modifiable versus non-modifiable risk factors. I just want to reiterate to our audience, when we use the word non-modifiable, what we usually means are things you cannot change. For example, your age, we know that's a major risk factor for dementia. Your sex, that's what we're talking about, being female, we're in a high risk. Having a family history of Alzheimer's also put you in a higher risk for Alzheimer's, as well as carrying certain risk genes, as Amanda has just alluded to. However, almost 40% of the dementia cases can be changed, can be modified, can be reversed through lifestyle intervention. So that's very exciting, isn't it? That now we are talking about the modifiable risk factors. So what you can do to reduce risk, particularly knowing that we women are at higher risk for developing dementia, Alzheimer's. So we need to pay special attention as to what we can do while we have control. So I am going to turn this to Jessica to start to talk about what can we do on a day-to-day basis so that we can really aim at reducing our risk and mitigate the risk.
Yes, this is a great topic because it's true. We have a lot of control. So even though there are risks we can't change, there are risks we can. And that 40% number, that's a big number. So the types of things that go into that 40% include things like medical conditions. So diabetes, high blood pressure, and obesity are all risks for Alzheimer's disease that we have some control over. Those types of things can have genetic components too, but if they run in your family and they're not impacting you at this point, the goal should be to try to avoid those. Another example of modifiable risks is movement. So not moving as much is a risk for Alzheimer's. And unfortunately, if you look on average, women are less physically active than men are. So that might be one area where women in particular can really make some changes in their life by getting up and getting moving on a regular basis. Another area of modifiable risks that people might not think about is what I would consider social, psychological, and mental health risks. So being isolated, not being in contact with people or connected is a risk for Alzheimer's. In addition, being depressed is a risk for Alzheimer's disease. Really, when I mention depression, I'm talking about the type of depression that comes up later in life. But the type of depression that's chronic across our lifetime and that's not treated also places a burden on the brain and in particular on our memory systems. So that's an example of something else that we can change. And there are more. There are about 12 on the list currently in terms of official modifiable risks for Alzheimer's. But there's even more beyond that that we can do. An example that's not on that list that's very powerful for how healthy our memory is as we age is nutrition. So eating the right type of foods and avoiding the wrong types of foods is one way that we can tie into even some of the mechanisms behind Alzheimer's disease that we've already been talking about today. And one of those is inflammation. So eating a diet that reduces inflammation in your body might also reduce brain inflammation likelihood. So those are some examples.
Well, thank you. I think that's very important for us to keep in mind, and we have constantly remind ourselves. As a matter of fact, when the Brain Health and You series kicked off last year, systematically we have been targeting those individual topics. We started by talking about the association between diabetes and Alzheimer's. And those sessions have all been recorded. If people are interested, obviously you can go on the website and get the link and listen to that. Here at the UNLV Department of Brain Health, we have a special focus on understanding the correlation between diabetes and Alzheimer's, and it's fascinating what we have discovered. But just as Jessica has alluded to, controlling your medical condition, stabilize your blood pressure, your blood glucose, has tremendous benefit with regard to reducing the risk of dementia. Amanda, you have also just alluded to earlier on, that is women also at a higher risk for depression and for insomnia, and also different response with regard to the hormones and the immune response. Wonder you can touch upon a little bit on that.
Yeah, definitely. So we know that women are more at risk for stress-related mental illnesses. And this is kind of interesting because there is a relationship with stress and in females with estrogen. So when you're really stressed, there is a hormone that's released called cortisol. That is the stress hormone, and it does have a relationship with estrogen. So as cortisol levels increase, or as you're more stressed, your estrogen levels actually decrease. And this could be causing a lot of downstream effects with things like energy in your brain, since estrogen helps with energy and metabolism in your brain, cognitive processes, and that neuroinflammation response as well. So stress is actually playing quite a role on your brain. So that's why it's really important for us to find ways to relax and decrease stress levels. And what's interesting too is that women tend to have a greater response to stress and a longer response to stress. So this is definitely something, again, that women should really focus on, is trying to reduce the stress.
I think we all have learned different ways of coping with stress. I see Georgia is on the treadmill listening, and even send us a text, say, get a treadmill disc. I think it's fantastic. Not only that you get physically active and fit, that's also a great way of reducing stress, isn't it? Jessica and Amanda, I wonder if you can share with us your personal way of reducing stress. What's your go-to way of relaxing and chill and cope with stress, which I'm sure you both have tremendous on the day-to-day basis?
I can offer mine, and that is that I'm not a very naturally chill person. So what I make sure to do is to regularly put things in place that will reduce my stress in the long run. So I exercise. It's one of my non-negotiables. Every morning I exercise, I walk. In Las Vegas, that means I might have to walk very early in the morning. But what I notice is that even if right after I exercise, I don't feel chill, if I exercise regularly, I do feel less stressed, and stressful things that come up during the day don't bother me as much. Whereas if I take too much time off, I can tell the difference.
You mean take too much time off from exercising, or too much time take off? Okay. I saw Gwen also texting running. I know that she is an avid runner, so I think we all have our ways. I wonder if any of our audience would like to share what's your way of coping with stress. Amanda, what's yours?
So I actually exercise as well. So I'm part of a soccer team here in Las Vegas. So that's a great way to make an effort of getting out and scheduling it. I have to schedule it every week, going and exercising, but it's also really good for social as well, playing as on a team. So it gets me out and about and socializing with people, which is good.
That's great. In our physical exercise and brain health session last year, we discussed in length in terms of the benefit of physical exercise on the overall brain health. Reduction of the stress is obviously one of them among many, many benefits. So if people are interested, you can certainly take a look at our last YouTube targeting specifically on this very issue as well. Great. So I want to turn back to Jessica a little bit. I know that you and Maria Shriver, among quite a few leaders in the country, started WHAM. Can you share with us what that means and what people can do here?
Sure. So Maria Shriver founded the Women's Alzheimer's Movement nonprofit, and her focus through that nonprofit was really educating and advocating for women knowing about their Alzheimer's disease risk and for contributing funds to research so that we could really change that picture. We could understand better why women are at risk, and we can start to apply what we know to help women to reduce their risks. So I was approached by Maria Shriver in 2016 with a request to do some work at Cleveland Clinic for how men and women are different when it comes to their brains and how that impacts Alzheimer's risks. Then a couple of years later, she came back and said, can we do more at Cleveland Clinic than just research? Could we actually offer a service that starts to help women now to reduce their risks? And I said, I would be excited to do that. And so we designed the Women's Alzheimer's Movement Prevention Center at Cleveland Clinic, where women can come. We have only one day a week at this point, but we have room for about 100 women a year where we can help them to really understand what aspects of their life are putting them at risk and how to change those aspects. At this point, the Women's Alzheimer's Movement is now part of Cleveland Clinic, so I'm excited in the next years coming to really be able to broaden out our mission to both help to fund women who are doing research that impacts women's brain health, and also just to hopefully raise more awareness about women's neurological health on multiple fronts beyond Alzheimer's disease and how women can really take care of their brains as they age.
Great. So how can people get involved?
So if a woman would like to be a patient of our Alzheimer's Prevention Center, the best way is to go to our website, which is Women Prevent ALZ, like the beginning of Alzheimer's.org. And there will be a link on the appointments page for how to get started. If you would like to call and ask questions, you absolutely can, but really every woman who becomes a patient has to get started on the website. If you'd like to call, the main number for Cleveland Clinic is 702-483-6000, and there'll be a prompt for contacting the Women's Alzheimer's Movement Prevention Center there.
We'll be happy to share the contact information in a follow-up email. I think that we have everyone's email when they logged in, so that's really good. Thank you for that. I think it's really the beginning of such a fantastic initiative. My understanding, Jessica, is that the strategy, the treatment, the program that's currently being implemented in the Women's Alzheimer's Movement is consistent with what we talked about today, and many times over in the past. That is how we can reduce the risk through lifestyle change, through lifestyle modification, isn't it?
It is. So the things that I mentioned before, we talk about in my clinic. So we talk about your medical health, your mental health, your social health, and about risks that people might not have known about, and really just how to both reduce risks as well as increase your odds of brain health even beyond Alzheimer's disease.
Great. I want to bring up another important topic in terms of lifestyle intervention. You know, we have talked about physical exercise, we have talked about nutrition, social connection, and reduction of stress. what we have not touched upon is the importance of sleep. When I look around the people in the room, I wonder how many of us actually got a solid 8-hour sleep per night. I see some smiling, and I do not necessarily get. I know, Jessica, you and I had this conversation. You actually got 8 hours sleep, don't you? So let's hear a little bit why that is important.
Sure, I can start there. Sleep is so key, and it's key for things that are directly relevant to memory and Alzheimer's disease. So 2 examples are that we consolidate memory during certain sleep stages. That means that while we're sleeping, only at certain times, we're actually taking things that happen throughout the day or earlier in our lives, and we're re-examining and repackaging those and shipping them off to long-term memory. So if we're not sleeping enough, we're not getting as many opportunities to do that, which means we might not remember as well, which probably makes sense to anyone who's ever had a sleep-deprived day or pulled an all-nighter and tried to really function the next day. In addition to that, we also do clear debris out of our brains while we're sleeping, again, only during certain sleep stages. And one of the types of debris we clear is amyloid, that protein that builds up in a bad way in Alzheimer's. So it's not that not sleeping will give you Alzheimer's, but if you're at risk, it can be particularly a good idea to get enough sleep so that your brain has ample opportunity to do the job that it's typically doing. Beyond these things, not sleeping well enough can also impact other things that are risks for Alzheimer's, or other things that are just risks for not having a great day. So, for example, not sleeping can increase our risk for depression. It can help us to get more stressed when we were hoping to get less stressed. And it also makes it more difficult to do things like make healthy choices. So if you're trying to change your exercise and diet routines, that can be really tough to do if you're not getting enough sleep.
Thank you for that, Jessica. I think that the current recommendation for people who are age 50 and older, on average, we recommend to get between 7 to 8 hours sleep, of 6.5 to 8, somewhere in between. So that's the optimal hours. We have a question here, says, thank you, Casina, for that question. What happens when you woke up after 4 hours of sleep for no reasons? Well, I might take that on for a second. So usually there are reasons, and we may not be quite aware of such. For example, aging. I hate to bring this up to the ladies. As we get older, our sleep tend to become a little bit more broken. And as we tend to approach the menopause period of time, the hot flashes, the anxiety, the restlessness, all part of our body changes that also play a part in terms of disturbing our overall sleep. So it's not uncommon for women, particularly women who are approaching or going through the menopause period of time, have disturbances in their sleep. So there are obviously multiple ways of how it can be coped. This is what we have been talking about, establishing a very healthy sleep hygiene. So that's your sleep behavior and your sleep environment and your sleep habit. The Brain Health and You series, last year, we had a whole session discussing with sleep expert, specifically address this issue as well. So there are multiple ways from how you can make your environment more conducive to a better sleep, from the lighting control, the temperature, the noise reduction, as well as to establish a routine before you go to bed. Obviously not using your iPhone or iPad, because all those the blue light that emit from the electronic devices can really interfere with your sleep, and among many other things. So that I don't need to go into a lot of detail, but I think that we just need to be very cognizant about the fact, as we age, particularly among women, our sleep pattern do tend to change. And I think we need to be aware of that. And we also need to really seek different ways and strategy that works for us. And of course, sleeping pill will be one of the options, but in general, it's not recommended to be on those for a long time. There was also a question about the CBD and Alzheimer's. So I wonder if Jessica, you want to take that question on? I can certainly add a little bit.
Sure. So from a clinician perspective, I know that Cleveland Clinic does not recommend kind of this type of particular approach to sleep issues. I'm not a prescriber myself, but I know that that is kind of the Cleveland Clinic's bottom line. And I would also just add to that, be careful no matter what you're taking for sleep. So there are things like CBD that are now legal, or, even THC legal in certain places. And some people will swear by those types of things. There's also over-the-counter medications, and there's prescription medications. I wouldn't say that there's any one of those that is necessarily safe. So for example, we see lots of women in my clinic who are doing things like taking Benadryl or taking Tylenol PM to help with sleep. And while it is true that, if you do something like that, very rarely, it's not going to hurt you. But at the same time, those medications have a side effect that we call anticholinergic. And the reason that's bad is that your memory system is cholinergic. So if you take those kind of even harmless seeming over-the-counter medications night after night, you might wind up harming your memory system. So please, whatever you're thinking about taking for sleep, talk with your doctor and just be aware that, it's something that you should really do mindfully.
I agree wholeheartedly. I cannot emphasize enough the importance of understanding what you're taking. Do not be fooled by the claim, this is natural, this is a herb, this has no side effect. So all those claims, I think you have to be so careful when you buy over the counter or some kind of vitamins and sleep aid, you think you can just get from CVS, but be very mindful what you are taking. And another word on CBD is, unlike the prescription medication, it has not been regulated, in the sense that CBD or THC came from different plants, different field. The process is different, the manufacturer is different. So when you buy CBD from one store versus other store, they can be entirely different. So it has to be very careful what you are getting. And by and large, it's not, as Jessica alluded to, it's not really recommended, but I know some people try that. We would not recommend as a clinician, because there isn't enough data showing the benefit, and also that there are a lot of unknown in terms of the potential risk and side effect. So with regard to research, that we know that there has been a lot done on understanding female, and Amanda, you have talked about the need of research on female subject. Share with us a little bit what's been progressing from the research perspective, specifically with women's interest in heart.
Yeah, so our lab here at UNLV really focuses on identifying biomarkers, which are markers of the disease, so that we know who's more prone to it, who's more at risk for developing things like Alzheimer's disease. And there's not right now a very clear consensus on whether there's going to be a biomarker that's going to be for both male and female, or male and some for female. So that's where research really has to continue to dive in a little bit to identify whether there is a difference in some of these markers between male and female. And I do want to highlight that we look for differences, but we're also looking for similarities. So if there are similarities between the same pathways, male and female, these markers could represent both populations, but it's definitely something that the data and the research has to continue to look at. And in order to do this, we have to continue, getting females into the clinic, getting them into clinical trials. We do have quite a few collaborations as well with the Cleveland Clinic, where we are looking at patient samples for these biomarkers.
That's so important, isn't it? I think that one of the example we like to use is that when one of the sleeping pill was approved years back, it was based primarily on the research or clinical trial subject. Majority of them were all male. And 10 years later, and we found that women actually have to take a substantially lower dose compared to their male counterparts. So FDA actually has to issue that a revised recommendation. So for female, we have to take a lower dose compared to men. So that really speaks to the importance of women getting involved with research and so that we understand better and more how we as women respond to medication. And it's not the same necessarily as male, right? So this is fantastic. So I want to thank everyone for coming here today as we are almost near the end of our discussion. I wonder, Jessica, if you have one advice, what would be your key message to our audience today?
I would say my top advice for all women in their brain health is really to advocate for yourself and prioritize yourself. So it's worth it. These might seem like small behaviors, but you deserve to take the time to put them into your life so you can reduce your risks. And it really can be a major change in the way that you age.
Very good advice. Take care of yourself. Amanda, what would be yours?
I would say keep the conversation going about this. Keep talking about how women could be different than men in some of these areas. Talk about ways that treatment could help females in general. So I know there's about, I think it's over 70% now of females aren't being treated for symptoms of menopause. So even going into the doctor and having conversations with your doctor about ways that you can manage some of the things you're going through is good. So keep conversations going and talk about this.
So I think this is a really great session. I want to thank everybody for being here. So we really have touched upon quite a few issues to understand why does Alzheimer's affect more women than men. And our two panelists really share with us the difference between the male and the female brain. We also talk about the different response from the immune response, inflammatory processes, as well as the differences in our gene response, the estrogen change and the role of the estrogen, and also the way how you should be approaching the use of the hormonal replacement therapy, and how you should really take that into your own control. Talk to your gynecologist, talk to your primary care physician, and find the way that really suits yourself the best. So we also have talked about how we can keep women's brain healthy through the lifestyle intervention, exercise, eating healthy, reducing stress, be socially connected, controlling a lot of medical conditions, and stay very engaged and very active. And this is part of Jessica has been talking about the WHAM. We have an ongoing program going on in the Cleveland Clinic. For people who are interested, there are ways of getting involved. Cleveland Clinic also has the Healthy Brains platform. It's free, it's digital. You can just log online and you can get your Healthy Brains index checked, and then it will provide the customized recommendation as to how you can improve your lifestyle in an effort to maintain your brain health. I also want to just give a shout out to the AARP. I know that a lot of our audience here attending today are over age 50 or 55. And so they also have a very comprehensive and easy to use Stay Sharp program, which offer very detailed recommendation as to what you can do to stay sharp and stay healthy. Our next lunchtime series will be on October 26th. That's the last Wednesday of October. And the topic will be on Alzheimer's and brain health. So I will be hosting and facilitating. My panelists will be Dr. Jeffrey Cummings and Dr. Jefferson Kinney. So we will be talking about some really exciting update on the new treatment for Alzheimer's, the update on the new diagnosis for Alzheimer's, and the new biomarker on Alzheimer's, as well as, of course, the brain health. Some of you may have already heard the late breaking news as of last night, so that there is a new Alzheimer's drug that has been reported having very unequivocally positive results, which was just released yesterday. And we are looking forward to hearing more. And this is really a great news for the field and for our 6 million Alzheimer's and their families and their caregivers. So on that note, I want to thank Jessica, Amanda, and Andy very much for supporting this. And I thank everyone here today. And if you have any questions, here is the website, the email you can send the link so that we will answer your questions. I know that some people have questions. We didn't actually have enough time today to address them, but we will be happy to respond in email in the near future. And if you have any suggestions for future topics, please do so as well. So on that note, I just want to thank everyone. And it's great to have so many of you here today with us talking about this very important topic, so dear to our heart and our brain. Thank you very much. Have a great afternoon. And I see you in a month.